This is Security Download, your ultimate source for the latest developments in private security. Host Anna Redmond will bring you the inside scoop, groundbreaking trends, and exclusive interviews with leading experts in both residential and business security. Security Download is powered by Brav, delivering tech-forward, customer service-focused private security.
Welcome to Security Download. I am super excited for our guest today. We're going to have a little bit of a different conversation than we usually do. He has experience that really addresses two key pieces of what we like to talk and learn about. So he is a public speaker, a driver of transformation, a revenue generator with 15 plus years of progressive product management leadership experience. The host of podcast Startup Lantern, so a fellow podcast host, the head of product in security, threat intelligence, and analytics at Infoblox. Welcome, Druce MacFarlane.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's great to be here.
It's awesome to have you. So diving right in and getting our hands dirty, tell us, in terms of what companies do wrong when they think about cybersecurity and physical security and their intersection. Tell us some mistakes that you've seen.
Well, the biggest mistake that I could say is that there really isn't a really good intersection between the two. They're often very different disciplines, and the people who are responsible for physical security have a tendency of not even knowing the names of the people who are doing cybersecurity. And that's a really huge mistake, because ultimately, when you think about cybersecurity, it's always a factor of inherent trust. You're like, it's what do you trust that you shouldn't be trusting, and that's where you end up getting compromised. So you think about you have the best firewalls, you have the best network security out there. You're running a lot of good campaigns from a standpoint of keeping your email safe, but then you're not guarding the front door of your office, and somebody can just walk in off the street and plug something into a conference room and then walk back out again. That's actually a really classic method that pen testers actually end up using, is trying to figure out how physically secure is the building, because often you'll see these organizations and they'll have great, as I said, great cybersecurity, but once you're in the actual network, you have free reign over everything. So all that they have to do
and by the way, I just have to jump in here. Yeah, sure. Scare us. Like, what's the worst that can happen? What can I do today? I walk in off the street.
Oh boy. Well, it's actually one of the interesting, more common attacks. And there's a guy named Kevin Mitnick, who was very famous a while back. And one of the things that he used to do, and this has survived for 20 years now, he used to, back in the day, leave floppy disks in the parking lots of the buildings with salary.xls written on there. And it's just so tempting. You're like, oh, I want to see what that is. And then they plug that in. And of course, it's infected with something. Today that it's no longer floppy disks. Today it's they're like little USB keys, and who doesn't want a free USB key? So they'll pull that in. And in today's day and age, again, it's what do you trust that you really shouldn't be trusting? If you plug this thing in, it looks like a USB key, and it may not even have a virus on it. That USB key could actually be a full computer.
Wow.
They have these things where you plug it in, and it will immediately take control of your PC, and it'll act like a keyboard. It'll just start sending commands. Because that thing, once you plug it into your laptop, it's acting like a keyboard, and it's thinking that it's you. So
have you heard stories of this actually happening?
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, something that you're starting to see more commonly now is, and sort of on that same line, is they've got these cables that look like charging cables for your cell phone. But you plug these things into your cell phone, and it will compromise your cell phone. So you have to be very careful of, like, if your cell phone's getting ready to run out of charge, whatever, you have to be careful that and trust that cable that you're plugging it into, because it can be that simple. And there's a company that it actually often operates for like nation states, but this is like commercial off-the-shelf hardware. You could go out there and buy this with the right credentials, because the company although technically, tries to, doesn't like selling to hackers. They'll sell to nation states, and if one nation state's spying on another one, you could end up finding yourself compromised pretty easily. So yeah, it's all about, so again, going back, tying this back to the physical security, you take those cables and you just like lay them around inside of an office somewhere, put them, leave it in the conference room, and everybody that walks into the conference room with the cell phone that's getting ready to die could end up being compromised pretty quickly. So
from the standpoint of either I'm a client managing my physical security or I'm a physical security company looking to learn, it sounds like the takeaway is, physical security leaders need to at least know that this is happening, so that if a guard at a desk sees someone walk in and say, hey, I'm just dropping off these cables for charging, they're not like, oh, great, that's so nice of you, what a good service. And then I guess the second one is they should have, because the pen testers, and for our listeners, pen is penetration testing. Most people know this. At some point I didn't, so I like to point it out. In this case, really the expectation is the physical security stops the person, right?
Absolutely. And it's just having enough situational awareness of there's somebody in here that shouldn't be. And here's the interesting thing about this is it doesn't even necessarily have to be that guy walking in off the street to sit down inside your conference room. It can be that guy parked across the street hopping on your Wi-Fi.
Tell us more about that, because this was really interesting to me when you and I first chatted.
Yeah, so that's actually like when you think about the way that Wi-Fi networks work, and people assume because of technologies like WPA and everything, it's all nicely locked down, but it's not nearly as secure as what some people would like to believe that it is. There's definitely ways of kind of jumping in. So somebody with the right software, a laptop, and a good antenna pointing at your office could easily jump on your network. And again, this ultimately comes back to the fact that once somebody is on your network, they're plugged into your network, they have a tendency of being trusted, and that shouldn't be the case at all. And organizations, again, one of the bigger mistakes that you see organizations making is they'll think to themselves, like, we're not that big of a deal. I mean, who would expend that much effort to get into what we're doing? And you'd be amazed, and people who end up showing up on the radar more frequently, like you wouldn't think that, you'd think like large banks and stuff like that would be prime targets, and they are, but they also know that they have really good security, so they have a tendency of going for lower hanging fruit. People can often get just as much mileage out of compromising a real estate brokerage.
Tell us how. This is so interesting to me.
So in that respect, so first of all, I mean, they are a prime target. You have high dollar transactions going through there. You've got lots of very private data because, again, people have to share all of their financials to often qualify for a loan or a mortgage. So lots of valuable data there. The people who typically work for a brokerage, they're not really working for the brokerage. They're kind of independent contractors that report in there. So the level of security that's on everybody has a tendency of being very inconsistent. So, basically, again, kind of pulling this back to the physical security, if all you have to do is know a little bit of information to do what they call social engineering, to call back up and say, hey, I'm, once you find out that Bob Smith is getting ready to buy a house, then you can, with that information, you can go back and you can call up and you're like, I need to speak to the loan officer. I'm calling on behalf of Bob Smith. We need to change the routing number.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you'd be like, it's actually nobody likes to advertise the fact that they've been compromised, but you'd be amazed at how
I've heard stories. I've been surprised at how many stories I've heard from, not like on the news stories, but people that I know personally where, there's some email and it looks like the right header and it's coming from the lawyers or it's coming from someone. That's crazy. And so you're saying the entree or the entry point to that could be someone parking in a parking lot? and finding some little path to slither in and get some kernel of data so that they can call.
Precisely.
Wow.
And again, going back to the real estate example, one of the challenges that you end up having with that is the fact that you do have all these people, they're kind of associated with the brokerage, but they're not. So so it's really common for one of them to forget their password to the Wi-Fi. And so if you know you can figure out the name of the realtor just by driving down the road and looking for open house signs, and then you call them up and say, hey, I forgot my password. Can you send it to me? So that kind of goes back to another common mistake that you end up seeing very frequently in different organizations. It sort of it's aggravated by the fact that there's poor physical security, but there's a lot of what they call security theater out there, where you do things that actually seem to make sense, that yeah, of course this would make you more secure. And like one of the things that drives me crazy are the organizations that will have the have the policy of you have to change your password every 30 days. And that is the worst advice I've ever heard anybody, because what ends up happening, well, first thing is, if you have to change it that frequently and it has to be strong, you're going to write it on a post-it note and you're going to stick it to your monitor. And that's a best case scenario. Worst case scenario is people forget. And of course, the people who are doing the network there are getting 5 phone calls a day from people who've forgotten their password and they need their password reset. Yeah. So when it starts happening that frequently, you stop checking to see who that person is. Is this really Bob in accounting? So you call up and sort of like, could you reset my password really quickly? And they fire that off. It's it's the easiest thing in the world. So doing things that seem to make sense from a standpoint of I'm improving my security, but really aren't, is really it's a big epidemic out there.
That's a really good one to know. Are there other examples of security theater that you've seen that come to mind?
So a lot of it has to go back and do with passwords. It's email was never designed to be secure. I mean, you think back to the earliest days of when it was invented, it was to connect a whole bunch of people who were probably sitting in the same room together. They didn't need, so the problems with it were kind of baked in from the beginning. And if you wanted to correct them, you basically have to throw things out and start from scratch. So people will trust too much on some of the security elements around email and they shouldn't. Like email, if there's anything sensitive at all, it should not go across email. You should figure out some other way of being able to do it. And there are ways of there are different ways of being able to take advantage of but that's another one. Really so much of the problems in the world would be taken care of with just a good password manager, as opposed to a lot of the stuff, a lot of the detection technologies that are out there. They're all closing the barn doors after the horse gets out. I know I'm not perfect. I mean, like I live and breathe this stuff every day, and yet every once in a while that email will come through and it will just look so good, and I won't be thinking it's like, oh. And I've been saved by my password manager, because while I may not realize that I'm not really dealing with Bank of America, because that website looks identical to it, and I've gone to this phishing site, my password manager knows that that's not the right site. So that's
really interesting. So you've seen password managers catch stuff like that?
Yeah, because I mean, like if you go in to a site that that's trying to impersonate another site, it's not going to be identical, and the password manager is going to offer up the password to the site. It's not going to know to. It's kind of it wasn't really designed for that, but it's like it has saved my butt on a couple of occasions.
That's amazing.
And and you'll find that the people who do this, the people who send out these phishing emails, they fall into 2 different categories. Like they're the people who are really, really good, and they'll craft that website to look identical to something that you trust, like your bank or whatever it is, or Gmail. The even the URL will look right. They'll spell Google with 2 zeros instead of 2 O's. And it'll just be it'll look perfect. And then you have the other extreme.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the Nigerian prince things.
Yeah.
And I discovered after dealing with this for a while that they do this completely deliberately.
Oh, so interesting. Why?
Because they want to eliminate anybody that has any critical thinking.
Oh.
So if you fall for something, you're gullible enough to fall for that initial email, you're not going to be asking the right questions going on there, and they're not going to waste their time. If they get somebody who might, their detector might be sort of go off after dealing with them for 5 minutes, they don't want to waste their time on that. They want the people who are really, really gullible, so they will deliberately make their attack really transparent, because the people who actually end up engaging with it, they probably already got them.
That's so funny. That's such interesting selection. I didn't even give it a thought. So to close the loop and to take things back, because I feel like there's some really interesting conclusions for physical security that I want to make sure we tease out. It sounds like one of them is, even if whoever is providing physical security is aware of these sorts of risks and attacks. And, typically when security guards are looking at parking lots, right, their concerns are, are employees there feeling in danger, right? Like, is a woman about to be attacked, right? Or is there, which is obviously also a risk in a different category of risk, or is there, are there people who are unhoused that are sort of in a space where they shouldn't be, and for whatever reason that's distressing to the customers or the visitors, and that's sort of where they're focused. And so I could totally see a scenario where a guy in a suit with a laptop sitting in a car, unless he's there for a real, if he's there for 12 hours, maybe it's on the radar. But how long does it take? It doesn't take 12 hours, right? It takes 30 minutes, 10.
They could definitely be into a wireless network within 30 minutes. It's
within 30 minutes.
Not that tough. And let's put it this way, it would take longer once you're in, just to find the stuff that you're looking for, because you've got this giant green field, and you've got to, unless you know what you're looking for in advance, to go and do the smash and grab. But nothing beats, and like with as great as we are with automation and AI and everything for being able to, nothing beats the gut feel of that guy that's sitting at the front desk and is kind of looking out there. That car's been there for a while. It's definitely, having that is, nothing can really beat that yet. There's we're human beings by definition are really good at being able to identify patterns in ways that even computers haven't been able to match yet.
Totally.
So having that person be able to look through and sort of that thing's out of place. I'm here every day, and this car has never been there before, and it's acting really, really odd.
And then I guess the other interesting thing too is knowing who to escalate that to, right? If you just think, oh, is he waiting to rob someone? You follow a different path. Then if you're thinking, oh my gosh, maybe that's someone hacking into our network, because then you would want to go and knock on the door of the CTO or whoever's there and be like, hey, just FYI, does this seem weird to you? Is there anything going on? And kind of on that thread, when you and I were chatting offline earlier, you had this super interesting point around the correlation of physical and cyber locations and how people have used those. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
So that comes down to one of the first statements I made here, is that there's no really good correlation between physical security and cybersecurity. They're different people, and it would uncover so much if you knew that the CFO is sitting in his office, but he's also logged in from someplace in China. Knowing that there's that weird sort of discrepancy there, just being able to correlate where you think people are versus where they seem to be logging in from, would open up a lot of basically open up a lot of visibility into potential threats. It's you know, that ends up becoming you ultimately you know, a threat actor out there. I mean, if they do try to go into a building at all, it's usually for a very specific targeted thing. They want to deliver something, they want to grab something. They don't want to, they don't have the luxury to go in there and spend 12 hours.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to raise a red flag. So then it comes down to, like, once they've actually gotten their way in, they're getting in with somebody's credentials and being able to correlate, you know, like, this is where this person actually was, and this is where we're all the different places that we're seeing him log in for, and that's a disconnect right there. That in itself could help, you know, help eliminate a lot. There's an organization out there called Ponemon that does security research, and they if I'm pulling back from memory here, but they said that the average organization that ends up getting compromised is compromised for about 4 months before they identify the thing. Yeah. So
wow.
you know,
And you could do so much damage in 4 months.
So you think about, you know, if you were able to correlate the physical presence of people and where they're logging in from, you might be able to cut that 4 months down to 2 months or 1 month or even less. I mean, like, right there, that would give you the information that you would need, that, you know, there's complete lack of visibility into, for the most part.
That is crazy. And that, you know, and I think that ties really closely with something else you said to me about, you know, targeting the people who it's easiest to target and how it's not always who you think it is. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I alluded to that a little bit already with the you know, with the idea of the realtors, you know, not having consistent, but we're actually finding in a lot of circumstances, I mean, if you as much as you would love to be able to target the CEO or the CTO or the CFO or whatever, the easiest people to compromise are the board members, because they're not actually employees, but they often have more information about the company than the average employee as well. So, you know, they'll have all these very strict rules about actual employees, that you've got to have this security software and you got to do this and and then there's the board member, and you don't want to make it inconvenient for him. So he's the guy that you end up sending the unencrypted email with the PDF file with all the company information. So you compromise the board member. He's often got a lower degree of the physical, you know, like a security footprint. You know, he's not as secure, and he has access to more information. So you know, it's like a win-win for them. You know, you want to go where the security isn't, and if that's why you're like, you don't see people trying to go after banks as frequently, because they do have things locked down. But if you can go after these other organizations that have, you know, better data or better information or more money or whatever, that aren't locked down like that, that ends up becoming the really good opportunity. Yeah.
That's crazy. And I would imagine too that board members are probably more resistant, right? Like you could require that an employee jumps through a certain number of hoops, and at the end of the day, the employee is getting paid. I presume, you know, the board member is also getting paid, but there's the sense of like, you know, well, I'm running this thing, I shouldn't have to, you know, do whatever.
Well, and the thing with the board member is he's probably not just a board member of that one company. He's a board member of 8 companies.
Yeah.
And there are 8 different companies with 8 different sets of policies about, you know, what security is. And is he going to deploy all of them? Is he going to keep 8 separate laptops, one for each? Like, no, he's too busy for that. So he's going to kind of dictate. You're like, no, I just need this. Can you just send it to me? Okay. And that ends up happening. So, you know, and again, from a standpoint of having a big target on your back, you're like, not only does he have a lot of information about that company that you're trying to target, but you might also happen to pick up something about the 7 other companies that he's on the board of, or maybe even, you know, like, often those board members are established by the venture capital firm, and you know, like if you're getting that, you know, like, and you have an entree into all the all the VC's information, talk about high value, dollar value transactions. Those
totally and harder to push back. Back on that, right? In terms of restricting access. So, you know, I've saved this for last because it's such a big sort of opportunity for conversation, but we can't wrap up without chatting AI and security for a bit, sort of like AI, cybersecurity, physical security. I'll open with that.
So yeah, I mean, it's like even in my current job, like part of what I'm trying to do here is analytics, which basically means AI, looking for, trying to sift through and find the stuff that's out there. It ends up being an interesting problem, because while again, I talked about earlier on how human beings are very good at being able to identify patterns, and to a degree, computers are certainly as well. The problem is that with security, you have the problem of the false positive. You want to make sure that when we're telling somebody that this person has been compromised, or that here's a problem, we're telling this to people who are very busy, and you don't want to send them down a rat hole. And what that ends up meaning is that we have to strike a balance with AI. And that balance is, if you aren't throwing any false positives whatsoever, you're probably not being aggressive enough in what you're trying to detect.
Okay.
So a degree of false positives is almost par for the course. You almost have to do that, otherwise you're letting stuff in. On the flip side, if it's all false positives, you end up becoming ignored. So they won't trust you if you have too many. So my job is actually to figure out the ratio. Like, I'm going to do one false positive for every 20 actual detections that I make. But that ends up informing what you're actually going to be looking for, because the thing that that you're looking for has to exist in numbers enough that's actually warrants looking for them. And then the example I give is, imagine that you come up with a Bigfoot detector, and that Bigfoot detector is so good it only throws one false positive for every 20 million samples. It's still going to be 100% false positive if Bigfoot doesn't exist. So we've been asked sometimes to look for very esoteric types of attacks that we've had to say, no, we really can't do that, because there's no way that we can get that ratio. The attack is so rare that nobody's going to end up seeing it. It's just going to be very frustrating, because you're only going to be giving them false positives all the time. Having said that, we're rapidly getting to the point now where the threat actors are sophisticated enough that they can avoid most of the easier ways of detecting things. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. So there's it's kind of a long in security, we've been talking about this for a while, but you don't want what they call signatures, which is like just being able to like, here's a URL, this is bad. Well, that's the easiest thing to just kind of switch around very frequently, so that URL isn't always the one that's being used. There's something that we have called DGA, which is a domain generated algorithm, which means that if you've got a piece of malware, that malware has to go in and check in with somebody for instructions. Like, what do I do? Here's the information I found. And if it's just going back and talking to one host that's out there, once you figure out who that host is, you found the malware that's going to this host, I block that, and and everything is said and done. So what the threat actors have done is they actually create domains using an algorithm. So if it's Thursday, it's going to be this. If it's next September, it's going to be this, and it changes daily. So
that's really sophisticated.
So with these things, like, you end up the days of being able to just say this is a bad host name, those are kind of rapidly coming to an end, and you have to do some sort of ML to be able to catch them, because it's about looking for those patterns. It's looking for the anomalies, and whenever, again, the problem is whenever you're looking for something that's based around behavior, you're going to make some mistakes. So that ends up becoming the challenge that we end up having going into the future.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that as we integrate AI more tightly, that it actually acts as like a glue to integrate physical security with cybersecurity, or not really?
So no, absolutely. So, and the thing that's making all the news right now is ChatGPT.
Of course.
And
I use it at least 10 times a day.
Yes.
It's so addictive.
And again, sort of going back in, like obviously, I think probably everybody that's listening to it has at least been following it a little bit. But I mean, it's an AI that's based on language models, and that ends up becoming one of its superpowers. So think about the attacks that we were talking about earlier on, where you're looking for, basically you're looking for easy entrees in for, I'm trying to figure out this person's password. And if you can go to ChatGPT and say, I want you to write an email that says this, and I want you to use the language to make it sound like this person over there. It ends up becoming a tool for evil as much as it can be a tool for good.
Yeah.
I've played around with ChatGPT and had it write press releases in the mode of a pirate and things like that. It's like you can have it imitate the language peculiarities of individuals, so that you can't, often you can actually tell almost like by a fingerprint, whether or not two pieces of information were written by the same person, because they use the same terminology, they use the same, they have the same things. But if you can have an AI imitate that, it becomes very, very easy to socially engineer something, basically an interaction, to be able to help compromise an organization. So yeah, all you have to do is start off with a little bit of information, and that's where, again, you go back to drive it back to the physical security. Somebody sort of hanging around the net, hanging around the office and figuring out, who was that person, or all you need is a little bit of information. Then you can leverage that to get more and more information until ultimately you have enough to actually get into the organization. So
that is both a exciting and a scary future to look forward to.
Yeah, that's what's like there's physical security, there's cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I consider this to be job security.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. They will always need help figuring these things out. And I'm sure as it evolves, there's sort of more and more cycles and threat reaction. That is so interesting. I have just loved our conversation today. Thank you so much, Druce. I've really appreciated having you on. To our audience, hopefully you learned a lot today. I know I certainly did. Feel free to tell someone about the podcast and share it. This has been another exciting episode of Security Download. Thank you so much for joining us.
And that wraps up another episode of Security Download. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at securitydownload.live, and be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app.